Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good night, good day, good everything. I wanted to take a few moments to speak to you all today about a very familiar topic, and that topic is on forgiveness. And I think that this is a place that we will always live. And I say that we have to live in a place of forgiveness because at some point, someone is going to say something to you that you're going to have to forgive. They're going to do something to you that makes you feel as if maybe you've been betrayed. Like if someone repeats something that you ask them not to repeat, or they break your confidence, you're going to have to forgive it. If they do something to you, you're going to have to forgive it. As a believer, it is a requirement that is placed upon us to live in a place of forgiveness. Sometimes this forgiveness looks like you having to forgive the same person over and over again. I'm not saying that you allow yourselves to be mentally or emotionally abused by anybody. I'm definitely not saying that, but I'm saying just in passing. Because sometimes it's not even a relationship that we're in that we have to forgive. It could be someone, a distant family member, or a distant friend, or an ex, or somebody that we used to have a relationship with, and maybe they're still sending us messages, and we're going to have to forgive it. We're going to have to forgive it. And one of the most common stories that we use to talk about forgiveness is the story of Joseph. You know, Joseph, in the book of Genesis, we learn a lot about Joseph. First of all, we learn about Joseph, about his character as a young man. And when you look from chapters 37 to 50, when I read his story, I really realize it shows a lot of maturity. And that's one of the things that we have to have as believers in order to forgive. You have to be spiritually and emotionally mature enough to do that. Because when Joseph first went, when he was sold into slavery, that experience was just as much about Joseph as it was about his brothers, and as it was about the family. Because Joseph, the young version of Joseph, was, prideful. He was favored, which kind of made him a little bit boastful, made him a little bit prideful. He knew he was favored. He was favored by God. He was favored by his heavenly father and by his earthly father. And so it made him walk a little bit different from his brothers, and they knew he was the favorite. So the Lord allowed his experiences to mature him, to grow him up. In all of the places that he went, from being sold into slavery to being a prisoner, everything that he went through, the goal of it, even though, the word of God says that, what the enemy meant for harm, God used it for good. The goal of it was to get Joseph to a spiritual place of maturity, which is what we are required and called to have. Because when you're spiritually immature, you can't forgive people. And I am not saying, you all, that this is something that is easy for us, because the reality of it is this: if someone wrongs you, if they do something to you and you feel it, you just feel it. If it's hurtful, maybe it's their words or their actions that hurt you, you do feel it. We're not dead, we feel it, but we're saying that we can't live in that place where we're holding on to that offense and we're holding on to that moment. You have to be able to acknowledge the moment and say, okay, yes, you did this to me. And yes, it was wrong of you. It was wrong of you. But I can't allow myself to stay in this moment with you, replaying this thing in my mind over and over again. One of the things that I really do believe, one of the ways that the enemy does, just really abuses us, emotionally abuses us, is by allowing somebody to wrong us, and then he keeps throwing that thought back in our mind, and so we're replaying that thing in our head over and over again. So they really could have just broken our confidence one time, and the enemy keeps reminding us of it over and over again. So in our minds and in our hearts, it's almost as if they've betrayed us multiple times, but it only happened once, and once was enough. So when we live in a place of forgiveness, we are saying, you know what? at some point something is going to happen. And I'm going to have to resolve within myself that I'm not going to allow the enemy to anchor me to that thing that he sent. And I can say this from experience because I feel some type of way when people that I've had relationships with, or if I feel like I'm and I'm not, I don't mean like a relationship like, you know, boyfriend, girlfriend, or anything going dating relationship. I just mean like a friend or a family member. But those types of relationships, I feel a little bit some type of way about it in my heart when you do something or break my confidence. Like if you take something that was confidential between the two of us and you share it with anybody else because you just want to have something to talk about. And I get it. You know, some people, I've heard people say, well, if you can't keep your own secret, then how do you expect somebody else to keep your secret? Well, it's easy because when people tell me things, I don't share it with other people. You know, and because that's at some point we are all going to need somebody that we can just be honest with. We're going to all need somebody that we can just tell the truth. At this moment, this is how I'm feeling. And it's not for us to go out and take that information and replay it to somebody else. Because maybe at that moment, they just needed to get it off their chest. They weren't trying to, you know, go back where it was not intended for you to go out and just give information to somebody else or to repeat it. But that happens. Or at some point, somebody will, you know, do anything that we see as a betrayal, a breach of confidence, a breach of trust. We have to forgive it. You know, when you look at, like I said, when you look at the story of Joseph got to a place that he was mature enough to handle what happened to him. And he was mature enough to see that the Lord allowed it. And one of the things that I really zoned in on with this particular story is how when forgiveness leads to reconciliation. Because there are certain people that you're going to have to forgive, and you might not ever see them again. Some people we have to forgive, and they're not even alive anymore. If you were abused by maybe a loved one, a parent, a grandparent, an aunt or uncle, anything, they're not even alive anymore. But there's still something in you that's affected by it. And I think that's pretty much what happens. Anything that has a negative effect on us, and especially because when it was at the hands of somebody else, means that at some point you're going to have to forgive that as well. You're going to have to forgive them. And when I looked at Joseph and his brothers, by the time his brothers came back into the picture, they knew they had wronged him. Their conscience did not allow them to ever really be comfortable around him. But Joseph had gotten to a place in the Lord that his forgiveness allowed him to reach back out and pull out the very ones that tried to put him under. And so I will say this because I'm very transparent, you all. I've always been the type of person to tell on myself. I'll never call like specific names because I think that's disrespectful. But I'll say this about myself. There are certain people, there have been certain people in my life that I've had to forgive them over and over again. Like every time I thought about them, I had to turn around and forgive them. And sometimes it would be me thinking that I had forgiven them, and the Lord would allow something to happen, and I could feel that thing in me that says, no, you actually haven't forgiven him. You actually haven't forgiven her. You just have trained yourself not to think about it. Because I'm really good at that. I just don't think about things. I don't think about things or people that make me upset. I try not to allow the enemy to keep putting that on my mind, and I try not to let myself keep replaying it, because it makes me feel like I'm back in that place, and I don't want to be back in that place. But sometimes God will put me in positions where he'll say, you know what? You're going to have to forgive. You're going to have to forgive her eventually. No time like the present. So me and you got to work this out. And one thing I know is that we cannot forgive as believers. We really can't forgive in our own strength. And so what I've had to learn how to do is I've had to ask God to put his forgiveness in me. I've had to ask him, okay, Lord, I need you to help me forgive this person. I need to be able to see them the way that you see them. Because no matter what, God always sees us through the eyes of love. Even when he's correcting us or disciplining us, he sees us through eyes of love. Even when we are wrong, he sees us through the eyes of love. And so I have to ask the Lord, okay, Lord, I still, I'm having some problems right now with such and such. I'm having some problems when I think about this person. I'm having some problems when I think about him, and I'm having some problems when I'm thinking about her. So I need you to, number one, I have to remind myself that you care just as much about them as you care about me. I have to remind myself that me releasing them to God is not saying that I've excused their behaviors. It's saying that I'm just not going to, I don't have to deal with it anymore. And then I have to reflect on myself, because at some point, I can assure you, somebody has had to forgive something that I said to them. And sometimes I said things intentionally. And at some point, somebody has had to forgive things that I've done to them. And some of them I did intentionally. So I have to put a lot of perspective into it. And I have to remind myself, okay, well, you haven't always gotten it right. You have not always said the right thing. There have been some things that you have said that could have been perceived as very offensive to other people. And there's a very real possibility that there may be somebody out there now that has been injured by something that I've said. And so we have to live in that place where we understand that just being human beings, we're going to mess up. But we have to be able to say, but I'm not the one who should punish you. I'm not the one who's going to punish you or me by living in that place that injured me the first time. Because if you were injured by it the first time, it's no point in replaying it in your mind, and then it's not fair. I volunteered at a juvenile detention center, and one of the things that I tell the girls, and it's something that I remind myself, it's not fair. It's not fair to hold people to moments, because the same God that changed me could change them. And you have to give people the opportunity to be redeemed. God is a God of redemption. And he's a very forgiving God. He's a very loving God. And just because they've wronged us or offended us doesn't mean that their soul is any less important to him. And since their soul isn't any less important to him, it shouldn't be any less important to us. And I think sometimes we will have people that we will forgive and we will never see them again. And I think that there are going to be some relationships that God restores, and we have to forgive. And let me talk to you all about those, because those are the ones that I'm currently being challenged with. Because I asked myself the other day, I ran into somebody that I hadn't seen in a minute. And I thought that was one of those times where the Lord was like, well, you have not forgiven him yet. I was like, because I had planned on never seeing your face again. And so the Lord let me know, you really haven't forgiven this person yet. And so that was something that I had to work through. Well, I'm currently working through. I'm not going to say I'm all out of the woods now, It was the Lord's way of saying that this is what's in you, because I need him to always keep me in a place where he can show me if there's anything that's going to cause me to be separated from you. I need to know, because the Bible tells us to work out our own salvation in fear and in trembling. So we have to pay more attention to ourselves than we do of others. But I was thinking about it, and I said, you know what? There are times that God will restore relationships. It can be a marriage that he restores. It can be an estranged sibling that he restores you with. It can be a parent that you haven't spoken to in years. And those are the ones that I feel like you got to really make sure that there's nothing, not an ounce of unforgiveness in you. Because what happens is, if the Lord chooses to restore you with that person and you still have that unforgiveness in you, they'll never be free. They'll never be free. And let me tell you what I mean by that. You know how sometimes we'll have, let me give you this example. I'm not married, you all. I've made that perfectly clear. I've never been married. But you hear stories about couples who one person may have had an affair and the other person chose to forgive. But then 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, they're, in a sense, they're still punishing that person for what they did. They're still punishing that person for what they claim to have forgiven that person for. And that's not forgiveness, in my opinion. Because if there's something in you that still feels the need to remember that moment, and there's something in you that still, if we're honest, wants them to pay for it, you haven't forgiven them. You haven't forgiven them. And so this is something that the Lord is dealing with me, because I was like, I told you, I'm the type of person, I just don't think about you. Like, if you do something to me, it's like it's like you don't exist anymore. I just changed my thoughts. It's like you never even happened. It'll probably take me maybe 2 weeks, if that, to get to a place where somebody could say your name and I'll start thinking about Mickey Mouse. Like, I don't even think about you anymore. But God has been confronting me about that a lot lately, because he's saying, it's not that you really forgiving. It's not that you have really forgiven this person. It's that you blocked this out to make it seem like it didn't happen. And for me, this is something that I think is probably one of my strategies that I've done to be able to recover from people. I recover from things that were said or done that were hurtful. So I just act like it didn't happen. But we can't really do that, because in order for God to be able to walk you out of it, to walk you through it, you got to at least acknowledge it. You have to acknowledge it. And that means that you're going to have to feel it. You're going to have to feel it. Walking out forgiveness is very painful, because you allow yourself to think about it in such a way that I acknowledge what you did. I can't pretend like you didn't do it. I remember what you said. I can't pretend like you didn't say it. But you got to put God's eyes on it. And that's how we forgive people. We got to put God's eyes on it so he can show us another way to look at it. And so he can talk us through it and let us know that, okay, yes, what she said was wrong. Yes, what he did was wrong. But in the big scheme of eternity, will you holding on to it help you? Because if it's not going to help you, just give it to me and keep it moving. So I'm praying now. There's some people, 2 people. Uno, dos. There are 2 people right now that I'm currently having to walk through, allow the Lord to walk me through forgiveness. And if I'm honest, I honestly know part of me, and like I said, I'm transparent, part of me, I think, knows that both of those people, God is going to recover those relationships. Like, I believe that he's going to restore both of those relationships. And this is how the Lord confronted me this morning, because he did let me know that he was going to restore both of those relationships. And I told him I didn't want it. I was like, well, no. No, sir. I thank you for the consideration of that thing, but I don't have to see either one of them ever again in life. And he said, well, no, I'm going to restore those relationships. So you need to get your heart right towards them, because right now it's not. Right now, my heart is not right towards either one of those people, if I'm honest. Not to say that, I want anything bad to happen to either one of them, because I don't. That won't benefit me or anybody else, because just because I have a problem with somebody doesn't mean that they've done wrong by everybody. And if you have somebody, I'm not going to wish any harm on somebody who has children to raise, who have a mother and a father who love them, who have somebody in their life that they've actually done right by. So I'm not going to do that, y'all. But it's one of those things where you're just like, well, you know what? I don't want you around me. I don't want you around me, because though you have done well by any, meany, miny, and mo, you did not do right by me. And so God is saying, well, how are you really going to show people who I am unless you can take them back? Because that's what he does for us. And like I said, you all, not every person that we forgive will we be restored to. Sometimes forgiveness means that I'm going to forgive you and release you forever. But there are certain relationships that I feel like God is going to say, well, I don't want that for you. I don't want that for you. Ideally, in this situation, what I want for you is that I want you to forgive this person. Because while I'm working on you, I'm also working on them. Because remember, with Joseph, God was working on Joseph and his brothers. God was working in two different places. So when they got back together, God allowed it because he knew he had done his part. He had done enough with Joseph and the brothers for them to be able to actually get back together the way that they were supposed to be before the enemy got involved. And this is what happens. Think about it. When Satan is always trying to destroy relationships, y'all. He's always trying to put us in a place where we are so quick to release the people that God has given to us. But what if God did that to us? What if we made him so mad or so upset that we just couldn't get back to him? And none of us will have a chance. None of us will have a chance. So we have to understand that, yes, there are relationships that you will forgive, and God's going to let you heal and let that person heal, and you all can stay your separate ways. But there are also relationships that God is going to need you to forgive and heal from and recover from, because he's going to bring you all back together. And when he does bring you back together with that person, whether it's a sibling or, if you've been married an ex or whatever it is, whoever it is, a parent, you've got to make sure that your heart is right, that you've allowed the Lord to heal you from that moment, from that previous experience. Because if you don't, you're going to get back together with that person, and then there won't be a purity in that relationship, because there's always going to be that blockade in you that's going to prevent you from actually bonding with that person. And at some point, God is going to use those types of relationships to model what this is. Forgiveness. This is not just forgiveness, but this is reconciliation. These two people are showing what it looks like when I get involved, when I restore relationships, when I bring people back together. Joseph and his brothers had their relationships restored. It was God's will for them to be together. It was always God's will for their separation to be temporary. And so Joseph didn't go into it saying, well, you know what? Well, because of what y'all did to me, I'm going to let y'all starve. And not only that, I'm going to treat you bad. And now that you back, I'm going to do to you what you did to me. And you don't need to say anything else to me. Matter of fact, going back there where you came from and starve. No. because God had worked it out in his heart. He worked it out for him so well, and he had cleansed him to a place of purity in his heart, that when he saw his brothers, he loved his brothers. He wasn't thinking about what they did to him. He was not replaying the words that they said to him when they mocked him and called him a dreamer. He didn't think about that. He saw the hand of God through it all, because he said, "What, I am your brother." He still saw himself as their brother, and he had compassion for them. He had compassion for them, and he didn't want them to be afraid of him, and he didn't want them to think that it was his right to punish them, because it wasn't. And that's one of the things that we have to understand as believers. It's really not our right to punish other people. It's not my right to hold somebody to a moment because they did something to me, even if they did multiple things to me, y'all. It's still not my right. It is my right and my duty as a believer to release them and say, you know what? The same way that I need to be forgiven and have needed to be forgiven, I'm going to have to exercise what I need. I'm going to have to, at some point, be willing to do the very thing that I need God to do for me. So I think I'm kind of just saying all this. I'm kind of replaying this, figuring this out as I go along, because like I said, you all, this is something that the Lord is dealing with me right now. So, who knows, in a few months or maybe a few weeks, who knows what it'll be. Maybe the Lord will have me and whoever these people, the two people that I'm talking about, do a video together so we can talk about what reconciliation and restoration looks like. And what that will look like for me is me acknowledging the hurt, me acknowledging, yes, this thing did happen. Yes, you were wrong, because you were wrong. But it's not my right to punish you. And it's not fair to you for me to hold you to it. Because that kind of means that I'm saying that nobody else can change but me. And that's not true. And that's not fair, because God is a God of, he loves all of his children. And he restores us, and he can cleanse us, and he can change us. And he'll reach out to us over and over again. He chases after us all the time. So my prayer for myself and for you all is that when the Lord restores your relationships, those relationships that will be restored, that the enemy doesn't find anything in us that will bring that person back to that place where they wronged you. Because to be fair, in another way to think about this is to be fair to them. Think about how you would feel if somebody always throw in your face who you used to be. If there was always somebody walking behind you, because that's what the devil does. That's what the enemy does. He reminds us of the things that we've done wrong, because he's constantly trying to condemn us and keep us separated from God. He's constantly trying to shame us and embarrass us and get us to a place where we're too ashamed to keep going back to God over and over again. And so if we don't want people doing it to us, we can't sow those types of seeds for it to be done. And so I'll say that to myself. I have to remind myself, okay, well, I don't like for people to say certain things to me. Not that I'm ashamed, because I've grown a lot. And I've done dumb stuff just like you all have done some dumb stuff. And some of it I meant to do. Like I planned on doing it. And I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. But it was then. And this is me now. And the Lord loved me through it and out of it. And so I'm going to leave you out with one last scripture. And then we are going to resume our busy days, or hopefully our rest-filled days. And it is, I'll start with Philippians 3, Philippians chapter 3, verse 12. Not that I have already attained or am already perfected, but I press on, that I may lay hold of that for which Christ Jesus has also laid hold of me. Brethren, I do not count myself to have apprehended, but one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind me and reaching forward to those things which are ahead. I press towards the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. Therefore, let us, as many as are mature, have this mind. And if in anything you think otherwise, God will reveal even this to you. Nevertheless, to the degree that we have already attained, let us walk by the same rule. Let us be of the same mind. And that's why what I've been going through the past couple of days when it says, and if anything in you thinks otherwise, God will reveal even this to you. This is something recent that the Lord revealed to me, that, hey, we still need these two people that you keep blocking out of your mind. We got to go back to this. We got to go back to this because I need you to release them. And I tell myself, you all, I know I'm not being fair. I know it to me, and this is strictly me. It is so unfair not to let people change. It is so unfair not to let people change, because I've changed. And I know a lot of people who have changed. And it's unfair for me to say, well, just because you did something that was hurtful to me, that it's unfair for me to make you to make you just that. Because what I'm saying is that was the only thing that you existed for. You existed for that one moment that you hurt me. You existed for that one moment that you wronged me. And both of these people, their lives are so much bigger than that one moment. And I know that they've done more right than they've done wrong. It's just sometimes when you meet people and they've been injured, or they have their own things going on, sometimes when they're around you, you get hurt in the process. So I'm understanding all of that, and I'm asking the Lord to just really help me to deal with them, because what I don't want is our relationship to be restored and I have anything in me against them, because that's unfair. God doesn't do that to me, and I don't want to do that to anybody else. Pray for me, and I'll pray for you. May the God of restoration and peace help us to be able to forgive one another and even forgive ourselves. Those relationships that God will restore, I pray that He just digs out anything in us that the enemy will try to use against that person and to destroy that relationship. Because once God restores a relationship, we don't want there to be anything in us that the enemy can turn around and separate that relationship again. God bless you all, and thank you so much for watching the video. I'll see you next week.